This is undoubtedly the greatest Cthulhu film of all time. Not only does it perfectly capture the indescribable nature of unknown life, but it also creates a bizarre world that subverts our understanding, immersing countless viewers in terror that lingers long after the film ends. The story begins with a bizarre disappearance. The missing person, Sutter, is a horror novelist, and along with him disappeared his latest unpublished novel. Since the publishing company had insured him, the case was handed over to insurance investigator John. Just as John and Robinson were discussing how to proceed with the investigation in a cafe, a madman suddenly smashed the window with a giant axe and walked straight toward them.
You read Sutter Kane.
What? Before John could react, the man raised the axe again. Fortunately, at the critical moment, the police arrived in time and shot the man dead, saving John's life. But this encounter made John realize that this case was far more complicated than he had imagined. To dig deeper, John decided to start with the novels. He bought all of Sutter's works from a bookstore. At first, he only tried to find clues within the stories. But as he continued reading, he found himself inexplicably drawn in, unable to pull away. In a daze, he found himself in a small alley where a police officer was violently enforcing the law in the distance. But the officer's distorted face was horrifying, and just as John tried to flee, he found a group of axe-wielding cultists behind him, including the madman who had attacked him. Just as John was puzzled, the cultists surrounded the madman, and under John's terrified gaze brutally hacked at him. John suddenly woke up from the nightmare, only to realize it was just a dream. But just as he let out a sigh, after being startled awake again, John realized it was a dream within a dream. Though terrified and unable to sleep, John found a spark of inspiration from his dreams. He believed the covers of these books must be connected in some way. So he carefully cut out the images from each cover, piecing them together, and soon a map of a real town appeared before him. John believed Sutter must be hiding in this town, but Linda, the publisher's editor, disagreed. She thought everything was simply a creation of Sutter's imagination. Unable to resolve the argument, Jackson suggested they go investigate. And so, John and Linda set off on their journey to find Sutter. To save time, they took turns driving. At night, while Linda was driving, she saw a young man riding a bicycle with 2 playing cards wedged into his bike wheel. They flickered with an eerie glow in the dim light. The car quickly overtook the young man, leaving him behind, but soon another old man on a bicycle appeared, his figure flickering and disappearing into the darkness. Linda was deeply unsettled by this strange scene. She tried to talk to the half-asleep John, but the drowsy John didn't pay much attention and responded with a few indifferent words. Reluctantly, Linda continued driving, but then Linda quickly slammed on the brakes and got out of the car. She found the old man's bicycle had 2 playing cards caught in the wheel, just like the young man's. The old man had been lying on the ground, groaning in pain just a second ago, but in the next moment, he was back on his bike, riding off into the night as if nothing had happened. These inexplicable phenomena filled Linda with fear and anxiety. The more she thought about it as they continued their journey, the more panicked she became. She intended to roll down the car window to get some fresh air, but instead she found the car was now driving in the sky. Before she could react, the car drove into a tunnel, and with the shifting lights, night turned instantly into day. When Linda looked back, she realized the long tunnel was nothing more than a short bridge. At that moment, John also woke up. By the street signs, they realized they had reached their destination. However, Linda grew more and more uneasy as she noticed that the place looked exactly like the one described in the novel. The empty streets, the hotel at the end of the forest, and even the woman in the hotel mural who seemed to be moving. Linda told John about her discovery, feeling like they had entered the world of the novel. At first, John didn't take it seriously until he saw the church outside the window. That's when he lost his calm because in the book, that church was where demons were imprisoned. Confused, Linda and John immediately went to the church, but the doors were tightly shut. As they were about to leave, they saw a large group of people charging toward the church, weapons in hand. The next moment, the church doors slowly opened, and standing at the entrance was none other than Sutter, the person they had been searching for. Before anyone could react, the door slammed shut again, and then a pack of hunting dogs rushed out from all sides, viciously tearing into the crowd. In the chaos, John and Linda took the chance to escape back to the hotel. At this point, John was filled with questions. He couldn't understand how Linda knew so much about everything. It turned out that all of this had been described in Sutter's new book. These unpublished manuscripts had only been seen by Linda, the editor. And what was even more terrifying was that Sutter's new book described an apocalyptic world where hellish demons would crawl out of this small town and slowly devour the corrupted world. Linda tried to convince John to escape quickly, but John, being a staunch materialist, didn't believe in any of it. Frustrated, Linda decided to leave alone. That night, John sat alone in the hotel, thinking about his next move. That's when a local man approached him, urgently warning him to leave. But John didn't take it seriously. After all, he had already experienced so many strange things, so what else could be worse? Meanwhile, Linda arrived at the church alone. She found Sutter, who was working in a room.
Linda, nice to see you again. You can edit this one from the inside. Looking out. It's funny, isn't it? For years I thought I was making all this up. But they were telling me what to write.
And the so-called them were demons from hell, who had given Sutter the ability to turn his novels into reality. In the real world, for every person who reads the novel, another demon arrives. Under Sutter's influence, Linda accidentally saw the ending of the novel, which turned her into a follower of the demons. Clinging to the last thread of her sanity, Linda returned to the hotel. After warning John not to look at the ending of the novel, she completely changed. Seeing this, John immediately called for help, but there was no signal on his phone. Not only that, he discovered that even the paintings on the walls had started to change. The couple in the painting had turned into horrific monsters. Just as he was horrified, he heard loud growls coming from the basement. He nervously went to check, only to find that the landlady had fully transformed into a monster. She was holding an axe and torturing her husband. Terrified by the scene, John rushed back to the room, planning to escape with Linda. But when he opened the door, he was horrified to find that the demons had already appeared in his room. John didn't care about anything else at that moment. He jumped into the car and tried to escape, but the streets were full of mutated people. Just as he was about to start the car, Linda suddenly appeared in the passenger seat. She grabbed the car keys and swallowed them. With the mutated crowd closing in, John punched Linda unconscious, then used a screwdriver to successfully start the car, finally escaping the danger. But this was just the beginning of the nightmare. On the way, Linda woke up again. It seemed as if some evil force was controlling her, and she started to attack John. With no other choice, John had to pull over to the side of the road, and coincidentally, this was the very place where the car accident had happened earlier. The bicycle still lay quietly there. The next moment, the old man appeared again, slowly riding the bicycle and disappearing into the distance. Just as John stood there in confusion, an eerie noise came from behind him. John drove off again in a panic. Just when he thought he had finally escaped, he was horrified to realize he had entered a bizarre loop. No matter how far he drove, he always ended up back at the starting point, as if he could never escape this terrifying town. After many hopeless attempts, John decided to stop running. He slammed the accelerator and charged straight into the crowd. Just as he was about to break through the encirclement, Linda appeared right in front of him. In a split second, John swerved desperately but crashed into a car parked by the side of the road. The violent impact knocked him unconscious. When John woke up again, he found himself brought before Sutter. Sutter didn't make things difficult for him. Instead, he handed John the completed manuscript and told him to take it back to the real world. At that moment, John learned a shocking truth. He was also a character created by Sutter.
You are what I write. Like this town. It wasn't here before I wrote it. And neither were you.
I know what's real.
Did you think my agent attacked you by accident? He read about you in there. He knew you'd bring it back and start the change, make what's happened here happen everywhere. He tried to stop you.
Meanwhile, the gates to hell were fully opened, and countless mutated monsters swarmed out. John knew there was no turning back. He could only run forward, but the immense fear and pressure made him fall. At that critical moment, John suddenly realized he had returned to reality. He immediately threw the manuscript away and took refuge in a hotel. The next day, a package with his name on it was delivered to the front desk. Inside was the very manuscript he had discarded. Terrified, John decided to burn it immediately. He then went to the publishing house and asked Jackson about Linda. But Jackson claimed that no such person existed in the company. He said he had only sent John to the town alone. What shocked John even more was that the manuscript he had burned just days ago had already been sent to the publisher. It was now a bestseller worldwide, and even a movie adaptation was about to be released. Stunned by this revelation, John was completely speechless. Soon after, John stopped a fan on the street, watching as the fan was completely devoured by the demons. Without hesitation, John pulled out an axe and struck. In the end, John was considered a madman and was sent to a mental hospital. He covered the walls of his room and his body with crosses, hoping that this would help him escape his fate. That night, lightning flashed, and the screams outside were relentless. When everything finally calmed down, John stepped out of his room. Everywhere he looked, there was destruction. The streets were empty, and everything he once knew was gone. In despair, he walked into a movie theater. On the screen, the very events he had experienced were playing out. The terrifying scenes were replaying before his eyes. This time, John had completely lost himself between reality and illusion. The sanity he once clung to had turned into madness. And with that, the film ended. Stay tuned for more exciting content.